Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The SADC Extraordinary Summit is taking place, or rather took place today in Harare. I think we have said on this platform that the summit should have taken place somewhere else, considering the circumstances of the summit. The number one issue, as far as many people are concerned, was the violence in Mozambique following the elections last month. And given that Zimbabwe was implicated in those violence, it was most inappropriate that the extraordinary summit should happen in Zimbabwe, with the Zimbabwe president chairing the summit. And so the decision to move them was the rational thing to do. It didn't happen, and the extraordinary meeting still went ahead in Harare. And the end result is, out of the 5 possible heads of state, out of the 16 possible heads of state attending the meeting, only 5 have attended. Ben, what's your view on this?
Good day to everybody. Thank you for joining us. You know, my position on this, I'm quite, perplexed to say, I don't understand. I really don't understand why they would snub, this extraordinary meeting. Because, the region is in conflict, basically. The citizens are calling out for help, be it in DRC, be it in, Mozambique currently, and Zimbabwe. They are calling for help on SADC to intervene and help out in whatever, possible way or within their jurisdiction. So them not coming through, it doesn't help from the citizens' perspective. Boycotting, if I may use the word boycotting, could be a sign to say, we are not in support of God knows what. I would have, preferred a much firmer and a much decisive, stance. Why didn't you come? Say it out. Or rather attend and fix the problem.
Well,
so for me,
you've got to remember that SADC is a consensus body. In other words, the individual, the 16 heads of state have got to come to a consensus on matters like this. So organizations like that are always as strong as the weakest link. Let's throw the ball back in your court. If, for instance, you were President Hichilema, what would you have done?
Yeah, that's a good example. I've been in this situation. I've faced, these circumstances, rigged elections, persecution from the ruling party and so forth. So I would understand the underdogs better and I would be in a position to make a better decision because I've lived it. Yes, it's a consensus, but I would have heard, let my voice be heard. What is my position on this? Him being quiet
What would you have
does
done
not.
then? You haven't said what you would have done. Would you have attended the summit?
Yes, I would have attended and said my piece.
And
I'm not
said
in
what?
agreement with this.
And said what?
That I am not in agreement with, whether it be endorsing the elections, whether it be, keeping quiet about the violence that is going on in DRC, in Mozambique, and what happened in Zimbabwe. You cannot keep quiet. You cannot afford to keep quiet. It affects each and every state.
Nobody's disputing that. I think what you're missing there, Ben, is the fact that in this case here, President Hichilema of Zambia, he was chair of the troika on elections, and it was the Zambian chairperson who condemned Zimbabwe's elections last year, and that report, damning report, was tabled. Let's just listen to this video clip where one of the journalists in Zimbabwe, Dumisani Milaya, is explaining that very point. Just let's listen to this, then we'll comment on it.
Development Community's extraordinary meeting will be taking place today in Harare in Zimbabwe. The summit is set to review the security situation in the region with the focus on the Democratic Republic of Congo and the post-election turmoil in Mozambique, among other regional issues. For more on this, we are now joined by Newshawk's editor, Dumisani Milaya. Dumisani, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. So when we spoke to one of the representatives from SADC a couple of weeks ago, he indicated that, listen, that this is an ordinary meeting that is taking place. It is a scheduled meeting that is taking place. Yes, there's concern around what is happening in Mozambique, and it may form part of the agenda. Is it known if indeed this will be part of the agenda, the post-election Mozambique violence?
Yes, it is known that it is going to be part of the agenda, although the SADC Secretariat and officials, they are emphasizing the DRC situation. But the reality is that when you speak to officials behind the scenes, that is both the Zimbabwean officials who are currently chairing SADC and the officials from SADC headquarters in Gaborone, Botswana, it is very clear that the real agenda is Mozambique. It's not DRC. DRC is always consistently on SADC meetings agendas all the time. So there wouldn't have been an extraordinary summit to discuss DRC when it is always all the time on the SADC agenda. So when you look at it, it's Mozambique, which is the main issue. And of course, taking into consideration events, recent events in Botswana, and also the upcoming elections on 27 November in Namibia. There's also in the background the issue of Mauritius as well, because they held the elections 10 days ago, and there was a major development just like in Botswana.
Yeah, so a lot of election-related topics that are on the agenda for SADC. But if you focus on the one in Mozambique, and also asking this question in relation to how SADC was accused of not really dealing with the issues that were highlighted in the Zimbabwean elections, with the observers there also highlighting issues, including the European Union's electoral observer mission. And then remember that there was that SADC report, and later on the report itself changed about what happened in Zimbabwe. What's the difficult task that SADC faces now as it deals with this particular turmoil that is playing out in Mozambique?
Yeah, it's a very difficult task, and the irony is that, as you have just pointed out in your background, the irony is that SADC, when it observed Zimbabwe's elections in August last year, the SADC Troika of the Organ on Politics, Defense and Security, which was then chaired by Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema, they found out the Zimbabwean election was not conducted, to use that diplomatic language, which of course I would then qualify. It was not conducted in terms of the Zimbabwean constitution and in terms of the SADC guidelines governing the conduct of democratic elections in the region. In short, they were basically saying those elections were fraudulent and rigged. That report led to a series of events thereafter. There was an extraordinary meeting or the Council of Ministers meeting in Lusaka after that report by SADC. And then thereafter, there was an extraordinary meeting that was held in Luanda to discuss that issue. SADC never withdrew that report. And then, of course, Zimbabwe tried to use its opportunity to take over SADC in August as President Emmerson Mnangagwa of Zimbabwe became the chairman right now, which is why the extraordinary meeting is happening in Harare now. He tried to make sure that the report was withdrawn, it was revised, but that did not happen. What then SADC did was that they just said, okay, let's say all the elections that were held prior to the SADC meeting that was held in mid-August in Harare, they were peaceful elections. They did not go into the detail, which basically means that as we sit here, SADC has not withdrawn its report that the Zimbabwean election was not conducted in a manner that was consistent with the constitution of the country and the rules of SADC itself, basically meaning it was a fraudulent election. So there we're sitting here now. Mnangagwa is now the chairman of SADC. He has called an extraordinary summit primarily because of Mozambique, because remember, there is the issue in the background of liberation movements that are on the decline, they are on the retreat, they're being defeated across the region. We've just seen in Botswana a landslide by the umbrella for democratic change led by now the new president, Dumaboko, defeating the Botswana Democratic Party, which was 58 years in power, and of course under President former.
So to come back to the issue that we were talking about there, the reality on the ground is what we see. In this case here, the fact that SADC did, or as I put it to you, you were Hichilema, you did put the report in condemning the elections. And SADC as a body, although they accepted the report, they did nothing about it. So I don't see what would have been accomplished by you attending the meeting and tell Mnangagwa what?
You know, I'm referring to the Zimbabwe past, 2023 elections. By, upholding that report, that was a statement. Here, what you're looking for is not basically the action, to say what does SADC do after, but it is now to show that you are not in agreement to what is going on. You're not part of what is going on. So back to the question you say, what would I have done? Just the same way I did bringing up the report, calling on the extraordinary meeting, despite knowing that, the opposition, they're outnumbered basically by the liberation movement. But by doing so and letting the world know that this is the position that I have taken, to say, I have spoken about it. I have spoken against what
Ben,
is happening
what
in
you've got to
Mozambique.
understand is after the summit, there will be a joint statement issued, which will be the consensus of SADC, not what you as an individual have said. So even if you say in the closed door meeting that you are not happy with what was going on in Mozambique, at the end of the day, the consensus is what will be reported. And if all the SADC heads of state turned up full force, and the consensus was that the violence in Mozambique should stop and the results are accepted, then you will be compelled to accept that position too.
Okay, then this would bring me to the question to say, even though they're not there, but they have representatives, can a consensus not be reached? Because you sent the representatives, right? Whoever is representing, for example.
By not attending, you are showing your protest that you are not happy with what is going on.
Okay, in other words, you're saying, I will not attend, but I will send somebody on my behalf.
Yeah, I mean, what else could you have done? That's what I'm asking you. What else could you have done to show your protest? Attending it will only endorse the statement at the end of the day.
Well, sending somebody will still endorse the statement at the end of the day, because I was represented.
If you seriously think...
How is it not?
Well, if you seriously think that summit was important, and I agree that it was important, and you know the issue is not being given the seriousness it deserves, but it's a consensus body, and your presence there will only be... It's not different from the argument we have been having with elections in Zimbabwe. You're keeping on participating in a process which you know is flawed, but by participating, you give it legitimacy. That is the same argument. If you're going to attend it, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, that the consensus is what is going to prevail, and your being there endorses that position, the only other thing you can do is not to bless the occasion by your presence. What else can you do? Here is a video clip of Mnangagwa being defiant, making it abundantly clear that he doesn't care what everybody else says. Here we are. Sorry.
Ukavona vavengi vakwasi kurumbidza nekuchikanganisa, ukavona vachiti ZANU-PF yakaipa, farai, because you are doing correct things for your country. Homu takaita maelections edu, kuna vamwe vaitaura zvisina musoro zvikanzi maelections anafamba zvakanaka, ndezvavo.
Reality you're dealing with here, Ben. You have got here an individual who blatantly rigged the elections. The SADC's own election observer team said those elections were flawed. The AU election observer team also said those elections were flawed. And here he stands up in public and says, dismisses them all. That is what we have. The tragedy of organizations like SADC and the AU, the same applies, and even the UN itself, is that these bodies have to work on consensus, and they can only be as strong as the weakest link in those organizations. That is the reality. And in the circumstances, I honestly, while I agree with your point of view, saying, well, I want to my voice heard, in this case here, at the end of the day, the consensus would have been all the SADC heads of state attended it. And as you can see from Dumisan Mlea's explanation there, what Mnangagwa is trying to do is even downgrade the agenda. He's added DRC, which really does not require an extraordinary summit, because the DRC problem has been there already. But he is doing that deliberately so that the spotlight is taken away from the Mozambique. He is named in the Mozambique election fraud, interfering in other countries' election process. And this is not the first time. He has interfered in other countries, in South Africa, in Botswana, and now Mozambique. And yet the guy is still defiant. The tragedy is that SADC, while it is an important regional body, and I agree with you that people in Mozambique under these circumstances will be looking to SADC for a solution. But the truth of the matter is SADC is so feeble and indecisive. In this case, SADC is of no good to the people of Mozambique.
I would go on a little further and say, SADC is no good to Southern Africa as a whole. Because honestly, if, it starts this small. I don't think, even the DRC, war just started without some form of demonstration. If you try and nip it in the bud, I think you got a better, grip or handle on things before they escalate into a full-fledged war, right? This is exactly what is happening in Mozambique. There were protests, and when the extraordinary meeting was called, there was a bit of cow, because everybody now in Mozambique is looking for a solution which is going to come from SADC. And if SADC does not take a bold step, I personally, I see this whole, protest thing going, on, basically, if it doesn't go even worse than what it was before. So SADC, I would say, has failed to get a handle on regional matters before they escalate. And in my own opinion, which is, which gets me to ask the question to say, what is their purpose? It's of no use if it's not going to be, helping the citizens, because I think the citizens are number one. It shouldn't be what it is being called now to say, it's a country club or it's a boys, club, and that's that kind of a statement. It puts, the organization, which was once held in high esteem, right at the bottom, which is very, very sad. I think by letting, certain events slide, particularly starting from the Zimbabwe situation, the 2023 situation, by letting it slide after endorsing your own, report and keeping quiet, I think it said volumes about, what they are and what they stand for as an organization. That, they are willing to let things just, go unchecked, and or rather sweep underneath the carpet and move on. It's pointless to have the summit after all.
Well, I think for the record, I need to comment on that. The SADC report condemned Zimbabwe's elections last year. What else could SADC have done? That question has been asked. And in my view, the answer to that one has been and still is, there is really nothing else SADC could have done. In the case of Zimbabwe, as contrast to Mozambique at the present, in Mozambique, the people of Mozambique participated in the process, in the elections last month, expecting them to be free, fair, and credible. And when they realized that they were not, they've protested and said, no, this is not right. In Zimbabwe, people have been participating in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed. For Pete's sake, we had the chance to implement the reforms during the GNU of 2008 to 2013 to make sure that elections are free, fair, and credible. We failed to implement even one token reform. What else did you want SADC to do? SADC was behind the global political agreement of 2008, and SADC was the guarantor of that global political agreement. So during the GNU, if MDC guys found that ZANU-PF guys were disruptive, they were not willing to implement any reforms, then they should have gone to SADC and said, we've got a problem. They didn't. We cannot deny the fact that we had the golden opportunity to implement reforms in Zimbabwe, and we wasted it. SADC called an extraordinary summit, which was held in Mozambique in June 2013. And they told Morgan Tsvangirai and company, do not go into these elections without reforms. Morgan Tsvangirai and company did not listen. What else did you want SADC to do? As much as I condemn SADC's weakness in this particular instance, when it comes to the Zimbabwe situation, you cannot compare the two. Zimbabweans have got to own up and take responsibility of the political mess we are in. Mozambique, I totally sympathize with them. The ideal solution in their case would have been maybe another government of national unity in the hope that they will be able to implement the reforms. But given the man who was chairing this extraordinary SADC was Mnangagwa, with a few of his cronies attending it, the chances are SADC was going to come up with a resolution which we will only learn in a few hours. I'm sure it will be in the media that Mozambique, the people of Mozambique should accept the results. And I think if I was one of people like President Hichilema, I could not attend the extraordinary SADC meeting and be seen to be one of the people who endorsed that position. I could not. Because I knew my voice would not be heard. And the only logical thing to do in the circumstances is not to attend. So I believe that those SADCHeads who did not attend this SADC summit in Harare voted with their feet. And in the circumstances, That was the only rational thing they could do. You want to give your closing remark there, Ben?
Yeah. In closing, I would like to say, it's really sad. We did speak about, Zimbabwe being, the venue to discuss, because Zimbabwe has been fingered, especially ZANU-PF has been fingered, in the fraudulent exercises that they carried out, of which, it is allegedly that, over 290,000 Zimbabweans voted in the Mozambican election. So, Zimbabwe could not be the ones to, to chair and give solutions, in this instance. And, they should have taken, another, alternative route to try and rectify whatever, until the whole fiasco has Zimbabwe's name cleared. But unfortunately, that wasn't done. However, I'm still, I'm caught in between to say, has SADC done enough as an organization to the citizens of Southern Africa? I believe, there is a lot more they could have done, to help stop this, protests and violence, because I know protests and violence, they always lead up to whether, full-fledged war or, destruction of property. We know SADC has lost a lot of revenue, if I may say, or trade, because the Mozambicans had closed their border, and they have a port, and all landlocked Southern African countries use that port. So that's financial losses, for not just Mozambique, but for the region as a whole. And they're always talking about development. How do you get development when, one of your key countries is not functioning? I think that would have been one of the motivators to try and, remedy the situation as soon as possible. So here we are. We, like, as you said, we will get the whole, 411, the whole story, probably by the end of day tomorrow, and we will be here probably to discuss the actual findings and the actual solutions, if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, those of you who were able to join us, and have a good day.